Women don't respect men who beg for attention, masculine philosophy. They feel it every time they chase someone who keeps pulling away. They feel it every time they send another message after being ignored, every time they tolerate disrespect just to avoid loneliness, and every time they sacrifice their dignity for temporary validation. The painful truth is that many men spend their entire lives trying to become desirable to women while unknowingly destroying the very thing that creates attraction in the first place: self-respect. Most men believe attraction is created through effort, approval, constant attention, and emotional availability. Society teaches men that if they become agreeable enough, patient enough, emotional enough, and available enough, they will eventually be valued and respected. But reality does not work that way. In fact, the more emotionally desperate a man becomes, the less respect he usually receives. And this realization destroys many men emotionally because they spent years believing the opposite. Centuries ago, Niccolò Machiavelli understood something brutal about human nature. People naturally value what appears emotionally strong and difficult to control. Weakness, desperation, and emotional dependency rarely create admiration. They create imbalance. And nowhere is this more visible than in relationships between men and women. Most weak men do not realize how emotionally dependent they have become. Their mood depends on replies, attention, affection, validation, and reassurance. If a woman becomes distant, their confidence collapses. If they feel ignored, anxiety immediately appears. If they lose attention, they panic internally, and without realizing it, they slowly begin centering their entire emotional stability around female validation. That is dangerous. Because the moment another person controls your emotional state, you lose power over yourself. Many men confuse obsession with love. They confuse emotional dependency with connection. They confuse constant validation seeking with affection. But women can sense emotional weakness far faster than men realize. A man who constantly seeks reassurance communicates something without words. He is emotionally dependent on external approval. And emotional dependence destroys masculine presence. This is why many men become trapped in painful cycles. The more attention they seek, the less respected they become. The less respected they become, the more desperate they feel. And the more desperate they feel, the more they chase validation in an attempt to repair their confidence. But desperation never creates attraction. It creates emotional instability. Machiavelli once wrote that men are driven either by love or by fear. And most weak men spend their lives chasing love while secretly being controlled by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of loneliness, fear of not feeling desired. And because fear controls them internally, they become emotionally reactive externally. They overtext, over-explain, over-pursue, over-sacrifice, not because they are truly loving men, but because they are terrified of losing validation. And women notice this immediately. A man who cannot emotionally survive distance, silence, or rejection communicates weakness without saying a word. His behavior reveals insecurity constantly. He becomes too available, too predictable, too emotionally dependent. And over time, respect quietly disappears. The brutal truth many older men eventually learn is that attraction is deeply connected to emotional stability. Women feel safer around men who remain calm under pressure, men who maintain boundaries, men who control their emotions instead of being controlled by them. This does not mean becoming cold or emotionless. It means developing emotional independence. And most men never develop it. Instead, they build their identity around being desired. Their self-worth depends on attention. Their confidence depends on female approval. And because they never built internal stability, rejection feels like psychological collapse. This is why so many men completely lose themselves after breakups, betrayal, or emotional rejection. They did not simply lose a relationship. They lost the source of their validation, and without that validation they suddenly feel empty. A strong man does not collapse emotionally because another person becomes distant. He may feel pain, disappointment, or sadness, but his identity remains intact because his self-respect was never built around external approval in the first place. Weak men, however, build their entire emotional world around attachment, and attachment without self-control becomes emotional slavery. The modern world makes this problem even worse because many men are constantly addicted to validation. Social media, attention, texting, dating apps, and endless digital stimulation have trained men to seek emotional reassurance every day. Many men no longer know how to sit alone in silence without needing attention to feel valuable. That creates emotional fragility. And fragile men are easily manipulated. Machiavelli understood that people naturally test weakness. In relationships, this happens constantly. Women test emotional strength through distance, uncertainty, disagreement, silence, and boundaries, not always consciously, but instinctively. And emotionally weak men fail these tests because fear immediately controls their behavior. The moment tension appears, they panic. The moment attention decreases, they chase harder. The moment uncertainty appears, they lose emotional control. And over time, women stop respecting them because they stop respecting themselves. A man who constantly abandons his standards to keep someone interested slowly destroys his own dignity. He tolerates disrespect to avoid being alone. He accepts manipulation because he fears rejection more than humiliation. And eventually, he becomes emotionally exhausted because pretending to be endlessly available requires enormous psychological energy. Many older men secretly understand this pain. They remember relationships where they gave too much of themselves away. They remember sacrificing peace, confidence, boundaries, and emotional stability just to maintain temporary attention from someone who never truly respected them. And perhaps the most painful realization is understanding that they participated in their own destruction by abandoning themselves repeatedly for validation. That realization changes men deeply. Some men become bitter after this. Others become emotionally numb. But a few finally begin understanding the importance of masculine discipline and emotional control. Because real masculine strength is not aggression, dominance, or manipulation. Real masculine strength is emotional independence. It is the ability to remain calm without constant reassurance. It is the ability to stand alone without desperation. It is the ability to maintain self-respect even when affection disappears. And perhaps most importantly, it is the ability to walk away from situations that destroy your dignity instead of sacrificing yourself to preserve temporary validation. Machiavelli understood that weakness invites control. A man who desperately needs love becomes controllable because fear controls his decisions. But a man who controls himself becomes emotionally dangerous in a different way. He cannot easily be manipulated because his identity no longer depends on external approval. And this is exactly what most weak men never learn. They spend years trying to become attractive without realizing attraction begins with self-respect. They chase women obsessively while neglecting discipline, purpose, emotional control, and inner stability. They believe attention creates value, when in reality, value comes from the ability to remain emotionally grounded without needing constant validation. That is why many men become emotionally broken later in life. They spent decades chasing attention while neglecting themselves completely, and eventually reality forces them to confront the consequences. So, if you are listening to this now, understand something important. There is nothing masculine about begging for attention. There is nothing strong about sacrificing your dignity for temporary affection. And there is nothing attractive about emotional desperation. A man becomes truly respected when he stops chasing validation and starts building self-respect instead. Because the harsh truth is this: the moment a man becomes emotionally dependent on attention, he stops being free.